So thank you very much for coming. For those who are watching online, thank you for watching online. Please make sure you get source sheets from the back. This is part of our 18-hour Shiur program. I have lost track of what number Shiur it is. I think this is number 7 of the. It's 7 or 8 on the day. I want to especially thank our two main sponsors for the day, the Weinbaum Foundation and Serena and David Kashitsky in memory of Riva Kashitsky, Zichrona Livracha. In particular, for this lunch, I want to thank Miller Bernstein and Associates because they are sponsoring. I'd also like to thank Yeshivat Or Chaim for hosting the 18-hour Shiur, and Peter for doing the webcast. This program in general, the 18-hour Shiur, is a fundraiser meant to support our programs for university students. The program is entirely free of charge, but number one, if you're able to support it, that will be great. We have a $10,000 matching fund, so any donation you make until we hit the 10,000 mark, we're about 7,000 right now. So any donation you make will be matched. And if you know a university student who would like to take advantage of the opportunities we have programs every morning for male and female students. Here at Or Chaim for the males, females at Ulpanat Orot. Please make sure to let them know or give me their contact information, and we can get them involved in the learning. So, this program on conflict of interest, first of all, if you want credit for this, that means we have to be able to confirm that you were here. So please make sure you sign in. There should be sign-in sheets in the back. Please make sure that they didn't get covered up by other things. Yeah, there are sign-in sheets. You have to make sure that you sign in, or we will not be able to confirm that you were here. Also, if you want to get notification about other programs we do for accountants and financial services professionals, once again, signing in would be a good idea. So I actually did this. I did this as a program about a year and a half ago for lawyers. I did a session on conflicts of interest. And I thought, I could make it portable over to accountants and financial services professionals without great difficulty. That was what I thought. I learned a key lesson. I had always thought, this is another thing that I had thought, which turned out not to be true, that lawyers were the longest-winded writers out there. But apparently not, because the rules that the CPA Society in Ontario passed regarding conflict of interest this past February are way more complex than what the Law Society does. The Law Society more or less says, stay away from conflict of interest. A conflict of interest is anything which a reasonable person would think to be conflict of interest. And so you should really stay far from it. And they have a few rules here and there for, and recommendations. This is nothing like that. What your society has done is to create, I'm hoping you've read it, the page after page after page on different types of potential conflicts, different threats to independence, what you have to do in this circumstance, what you do in that circumstance. It's basically Rule 204 and 210 within the rules, but those seem to take up the bulk of the rules. So what I want to do is try to address some issues that come up related to conflict of interest. Generally speaking, from a commercial perspective, we would like to enable every professional to serve every client, right? That would be the ideal, in order to ensure that professionals can find work and clients can find services, right? That's the normal goal. In fact, sometimes it's in the best interest of a client to actually overlook a conflict of interest. If you take a look on your sheets at the first source, there are many sources we will have to see, but take a look, please, at the first source. When assessing a conflict of interest, members or firms should consider the following questions. What will be the impact on the party's ability to obtain professional services should the member or firm choose to decline the engagement? In other words, if you say, well, let me just walk away, that may actually harm the client more than the conflict of interest harms the client. In smaller communities where there may be less access to professional services, there may be more occasions when it is necessary to manage conflicts of interest, manage being a polite word for deal with it. That's one example, and then I brought you another one. Will the member's or firm's decision to avoid the conflict by terminating the provision of the professional service be a commercially satisfactory solution for the party or parties in conflict? In many cases, the solution to avoid the conflict by terminating the provision of the professional services to each of the parties will not be commercially satisfactory. In other words, you may be hurting them financially by doing this. So we don't necessarily want to say that the answer to every problem is stop, just don't serve. That doesn't necessarily work. However, there are, okay? Sorry? Oh, just pass it some way. However, there are fundamental concerns in the professional rules, as well as in halacha, in Jewish law, regarding the possibility that professional service of clients could be warped by competing interests. I brought you first from the CPA code. If you take a look at source number 2, the concern for objectivity. A member or firm shall not allow his or her professional or business judgment to be compromised by bias, conflict of interest, or the undue influence of others. When it's in italics, that's an actual rule, as opposed to if there are no italics, that's the guidance on the rules. So you have a rule that says that you can't allow your judgment to be compromised by conflict of interest. Source number 3 from Rule 210. A member or firm shall determine, in relation to a particular matter and before agreeing to undertake or continuing to provide any professional service, whether a conflict of interest may exist, as contemplated by Rule 210.2. So you have to make sure you're not compromised, and you have to be proactive in identifying a threat to your independence. What constitutes a threat to your independence? So there are certain threats that are listed in source number 4, the guidance to Rules 204.1 to 204.3. Independence is potentially affected by self-interest, self-review, advocacy, familiarity, and intimidation threats. Each of these has its own threat, which the guidance goes on to explain. For example, self-interest is a fairly clear one, where you have some way in which you would benefit if you went in a particular direction, so that is a threat to your independence. Familiarity is another one that we're going to come back to. If you know the people too well, and as a result, you have a bias towards trying to help them in their endeavors. The mere existence of such threats does not per se mean that the performance of a prospective engagement is precluded. The fact that there is a threat to your independence doesn't mean you can't work for them. The undertaking or continuation of an engagement is only precluded where safeguards are not available to eliminate or reduce the threats to an acceptable level, or where Rule 204.4 provides a specific prohibition. There are certain circumstances where forget it. There are no safeguards, don't bother, do not pass go, do not collect $200. But in many cases, there are ways that you can manage the problem. Some of the terms are probably familiar, right? Firewall, cone of silence, and so on. There are ways in which you can block off sections of the firm from other sections to preclude any information passing back and forth. There are measures that can be taken. We're not going to be talking a whole lot about the measures today. We're dealing more with the problem. But that's from a CPA rules perspective. What about within halacha? What about within Jewish law? Is there an analogous concern in Jewish law for conflict of interest? And the answer is yes. There are concerns about conflict of interest. I gave you one example in source number 5, by Moshe Isserlis. You don't have it stated in the same systematic way that in 2016 the accountants decided to write out in their very long code. You don't have a sort of systematic presentation in halacha of conflict of interest. What you do have are particular circumstances that are outlined and that give insight to their applications elsewhere. So one example in source number 5 is dealing with guardianship, an apotropos, when you want to appoint a guardian. So the Ramah, Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, writing in the Ashkenazi portion of the Code of Jewish Law, says, Yesh omrim, some say, K'moshe ha'apotropos yachol litnam la'achirim, the guardian is managing the assets of the minor, just like he's able to say, I think it will be a fine investment for me to take those assets and invest them there. So too, if he has his own business, some say he's allowed to invest it with his own business. However, he has to have rabbinical court oversight. Meaning he can't make that assessment himself that this is a good investment for them. He has to have a court oversight, if only because of Mishum Lezus Sifasayim. Even if he knows what he's doing and he's sure I'm going to be good and all that, it's going to look bad. And that's something we're going to come back to a little bit later, is the issue of appearances. But you already see that there is this concern for a potential competing interest. And that comes up most often, not in the realm of professional services, but in the realm of the judicial system, the courts, and the concern for shochad, the concern for bribery. If you take a look at source number 6, to show you how far we go in the realm of law, the Torah says, V'shochad lo sikach, right? We read it in the Torah not that long ago. V'shochad lo sikach, you shall not take a bribe. Mata malomar, why does the Torah need to tell me that? If the goal of that verse is simply to tell me, don't take a bribe in order to judge dishonestly, right? Don't take a bribe in order to find someone innocent when he's guilty, or vice versa. I didn't need this verse. I have a separate verse that says, don't warp justice. I don't need a special sentence about bribery. What it's saying is, even if the goal of the bribe is to get you to do the right thing. Someone says, Judge, Your Honor, I want to make sure you put proper focus into this. So I'm going to give you a payment that's going to enable you to focus and just do the right thing. Whatever is right, that's what I want you to do. You have to recuse yourself from the case. You can't accept payment even to do the right thing. You're not allowed to accept a payment because we are concerned regarding its influence. So what I want to do is walk through both the CPA code and Jewish law regarding the following 3 questions, all involving a man by the name of Jonathan and his sister-in-law by the name of Sarah. Okay? We're going to meet Jonathan and Sarah. Here's my opening case. I didn't put it out on the sheet. Jonathan is a partner in a small accounting firm. He specializes in auditing automobile sales dealerships. That's his specialty. His brother marries a woman by the name of Sarah. And in our first phase, Sarah manages customer relations for a Honda dealership. May Jonathan serve on the engagement team for Sarah's Honda dealership. Okay? His sister-in-law manages customer relations for the dealership. Is he allowed to audit that dealership? That's going to be question number 1. Question number 2 will be the following. Sarah takes a new position as controller of the Honda dealership. How you moved from customer relations to being controller, don't worry about it. We could invent new names and a new case if we really like. But that's what she did. Jonathan is concerned for a familiarity threat. And he reports it to the dealer principal. He goes to the dealer and he says, I have a problem. My sister-in-law is now your controller, and you want me to be the auditor who's going to audit the business. The dealer principal says, that's okay. I'm not worried about it. May Jonathan continue to serve on the engagement team? Can he do that, even though his sister-in-law is the controller for the company? And then the third question, Jonathan's brother and Sarah divorced in 2010. Okay, she's now 6 years out from having been his sister-in-law. Is Jonathan allowed to serve on the engagement team now for Sarah's dealership because it's been 6 years since she's been married to his brother? Those are the 3 questions that I'd like us to deal with. Obviously, each involves a different aspect of the problem. So we're going to go through them one by one. We have to begin with the overarching philosophy involved. Why is it that we are concerned about independence? What's the issue here? What are we really worried about? Yeah?
I think the big thing is who the users are of the audited financial statements. And so the question is going to be, will they fairly represent, will the auditor overlook things or allow things in those statements that he wouldn't otherwise if he didn't have this familiarity?
Will he do a bad job, in other words?
Will he do the wrong job?
Okay. Will he do the wrong job? And your concern is that who will get hurt?
The people who use the statements.
The people who use the statements, which may be the company and may be others.
Investors, maybe the bank.
Okay. That's one possibility for concern. What else could be a cause of concern? What else might we be worried about? Take a look, please, at source number 7. From the preamble to the CPA Code of Professional Conduct. Chartered professional accountants conduct themselves at all times in a manner which will maintain the good reputation of the profession and serve the public interest. In doing so, members in firms are expected to avoid any action that would discredit the profession. There's an overall concern. You make accounting look bad when you take on a job where you're clearly going to be biased. This is a much bigger concern, or I hear it expressed much more in the realm of law. They talk about making the law look bad, which other people laugh a lot when you say that. But that's the concern is you make it look bad because it looks awfully suspicious.
Bringing disrepute.
Correct, bringing disrepute to the profession. So that's a concern. And then, chartered professional accountants do not allow their professional or business judgment to be compromised by bias, conflict of interest, or the undue influence of others. Clients, employers, and the public generally expect that members in firms will bring objectivity and sound professional judgment to their services. It thus becomes essential that a member or firm will not subordinate professional judgment to external influences or the will of others. In other words, you have a contractual obligation. It's not only a matter of who's going to be hurt, by this. You sign an agreement. It says that you are going to provide objectivity and sound professional judgment. That's the assumption that people make when they hire you. So by what right would you now subordinate that to your interest that you now have to somebody else, to Sarah, the sister-in-law, or whoever it is? Now, the standard that's given is the reasonable person standard. Although they will give you specific cases, it's would a reasonable person think that you could be unbiased, that you could be independent? Moshe.
I would think that the first case would not be a problem, the second case would be a problem, the third case would not be a problem.
All right, so you got your vote in,
Right.
but the...
Because the first case, basically, she's not in such a high position that it will have any effect on any decision he makes, or whatever he does the audit. The second case is a controller, she does have the power, therefore, that would be 100% be a conflict of interest. And the third one, she probably can't stand him and his brother, so it would be zero conflict of interest in the third one.
So this is good. I got a 40-minute break now in the 18-hour shiur. No, I think there's more to be said. I think there's more to be said. Okay. Within halacha, within Jewish law, what this is fundamentally about is not the name of the profession, because in Jewish law there is no concern for the reputation of the accounting profession, all due respect to the accountants. What there is a challenge to fulfilling contractual obligations. Because there, we are very, very concerned. If you take a look at source number 8, the passage from the Talmud comes from the same area that number 6 came from. Amar Rava says, "My taima de shochada." He says, why is a bribe forbidden? Why are you not allowed to accept a bribe? Kevan de kabil le shochada mine. Once you accept a bribe from somebody, ikra vale daite legabe. Your mind becomes close to that person. Vahavi kigufei. You view him as being like yourself. His interest becomes your interest. Vein adam roa chova la'atzmo. And as a general rule, people don't see guilt in themselves. People have a hard time finding fault with themselves. And then they have a play on words. The word in Hebrew for bribe is shochad. So it breaks it into shehu chad. Shehu chad, which either means it is one, meaning he and the briber become one, or it is sharp. It has a very sharp impact. I tend to think it's the former. The idea is that it makes you one with the person who bribed you. It creates affection between the two. And therefore, we say in source number 9, from the Midrash, in the Sifra, this is a classic, on the pasuk, on the Torah's verse that says, "V'lifnei iver lo sitein michshol," do not put a stumbling block in front of the blind. The Torah says, the Midrash says, here's an example of that. Al tomar lo mechores sadecha. Don't say to him, you should sell your field, v'kach lecha chamor, and buy a donkey for yourself, right? Which, we already know is a bad idea. In terms of, as advice goes, generally speaking, you don't get rid of real estate to buy an animal. Right? If anyone didn't know that, I'm not a businessman, don't take business advice from me, but I think that's a good one. So don't give somebody this kind of advice. Ve'ata okef alav v'not lamimenu. While what you're doing is you want to get the field from him. It's a conflict of interest. Your interest is to get his field. You say to him, yeah, that's a good deal. By the way, I'm the buyer. That's a concern for conflict of interest. It's under what we call lifnei iver, causing somebody who is unaware to stumble. That's where my prohibition lies. Now, there could be other aspects of prohibition. In other words, if I have a contract with somebody and a contract specifies that I'm not going to have conflicts of interest, then I'm also lying by engaging in that deal. So there is the issue of violating a contract. But the basic concern is fundamentally the concern for giving him bad advice. Yeah?
Can it also be
Yes. There absolutely can be an issue of genevas das. Genevas das is deception. I'm not allowed to deceive. However, the argument could be made that I didn't deceive. In other words,
if you had something that you could have declared and you chose not to declare, I think there's a
right, yes.
Where if you're selling something and then you have to say that there's something deficient.
Correct. When you're dealing with other issues, you're dealing with sales and you need to disclose, then absolutely there are issues of genevas das, there are issues of deception, which potentially have even greater teeth than the don't cause somebody to stumble concern. That is certainly true. But in many of the conflict of interest cases, the concern isn't necessarily that you were deceptive even. You know, in the case of the sale, the guy who's thinking about selling his land, he may know I'm the buyer, but he trusts me. When I say to him, yeah, this is a good deal for you. So directly, it's a lifnei iver. I'm causing him to stumble. There is another possibility I should also mention. I brought it in source number 10. The Gemara in Baba Basra. V'rashayin b'nei ha'ir lahasnos al hamidos v'al ha'sha'arim v'al schar po'alim u'la'asiyal kitzazan. Communities have the right to make whatever commercial measures they want and enforce them on the community. So in other words, the accountants are within their rights to say, we're creating a society for accounting, and they're going to be responsible to legislate what accountants may and may not do, and therefore you will be bound by whatever rules they create. And if they decide this is a conflict of interest, then Jewish law will recognize that as well. And that's true within just social contract, where the community does this, and it's certainly true if it becomes government legislation. Right? What you have here with the CPA society, like with law, like with medicine, is where the government outsources the running of the profession to the professionals. Whether that's a good idea or a bad idea, I leave to others to discuss. But that's the system. The CPA code is written by the CPA society, and they're licensed to do that the same way the Law Society of Upper Canada is able to write the rules that say what lawyers can and can't and do, what they can and can't do, and ditto for the College of Physicians and Surgeons. Okay. So in both of our concerns, in both the concerns of the secular system or the halachic system, the concern is not that one actually becomes incompetent because of the conflict of interest. The concern, even though the wording of the Gemara was a little bit like you can't see fault in yourself, the concern is not really you will no longer be a capable accountant because you have this other person you want to satisfy or your own personal financial gain that you're looking to feed. The concern is more subtle. It's about professional judgment. If you go back to the preamble again, the preamble stated that the concern is, where was it? It was in source number 7. Not allow their professional or business judgment to be compromised by bias. The concern is that when you are no longer objective, you make judgment calls that are wrong. And that actually has a very interesting application in the eyes of Jewish law. That's not only a function of secular law, that's a function of Jewish law as well, with two very interesting rules. I brought it here in source number 11 versus source number 12. Source number 11 from the Shulchan Aruch, from the Code of Jewish Law, says, I am not allowed to be a judge on a case that involves a friend of mine. Even if they're not my best friend, even if not a shushvin. Shushvin is something that goes back to the times of the Gemara. It was a quasi-contractual arrangement in which a group of friends agree that when one of them gets married, they're going to bring a gift, and then the deal is that all the members of the circle are obligated to bring gifts when each member of the circle gets married. That's this shushvin arrangement. So even if this guy's not that close to you, he's not your best friend, you still can't judge his case. You also may not judge the case for somebody you hate. Even if he's not your enemy, you're not trying to hurt him. Litigants must be equal in the eyes and hearts of the judges. Yes, Claudette.
This is why I disagree with the last scenario,
Yeah.
where he should recuse himself because he could be biased against his sister-in-law, even though she's no longer his sister-in-law.
Okay, so we have multiple views on the ex-sister-in-law. We'll talk it through. Hang on, we'll talk it through. We got to get there. Right now we're on overarching philosophy. We'll get there. But source number 11 says, can't be a judge Can't be a judge if they're your friend. Can't be a judge if they're somebody you don't like. Source number 12, on the other hand, also Code of Jewish Law in the Shulchan Aruch, says all who are disqualified to judge are disqualified to testify. If I have a relationship with somebody such that I can't judge them, I also cannot be a witness in their case, other than a friend or enemy, who may testify even though they may not judge. Your friend is allowed to be a witness for you. Your enemy is allowed to be a witness involving a case that you are in. You could be the defendant, you could be the plaintiff, whatever it is, makes no difference. Your friend, your enemy are allowed to serve as witnesses, not as judges. Why would I make such a distinction? Yes?
You can be tested as a witness.
You could be tested? Okay.
A witness just states what he or she saw, whereas a judge determines what should be the outcome of the facts presented. So
Excellent.
there's a lot more going on.
Right. There's a difference, and this goes back to my point about professional judgment. It isn't that we believe you become incompetent. You're not able to tell what you saw. You don't know how to add numbers. That's not the concern. The concern is judgment, because you always have to make judgment calls. Does the law apply to this? Would this be acceptable? Those are judgment calls. If you take a look at source number 13, Rabbi Yoshua Falk in the Sma, commenting on the Shulchan Aruch, on the Code of Jewish Law, he says, I'm just sticking with the English in the interest of time, but I brought you the Hebrew so you could see the original. In testimony, he testifies about what he saw. We don't suspect he would intentionally alter it for love or hatred. This is not so in judgment, which depends on logic. One's mind changes due to love or hatred, even without evil intent. That is the consideration that we have. Okay. Both systems, both halacha and the secular system, are concerned, as I noted earlier, about perception. But here's another interesting thing. The concerns vary. They're both concerned about perception, but for different reasons. If you take a look at source number 14 from the CPA code, the confidence that professional judgment has been exercised depends on the unbiased and objective state of mind of the reporting accountant, both in fact and appearance. Even if you know it's fine, it has to appear fine as well. That's the statement of the CPA code. Judaism adds to this a religious component and says the issue of maintaining appearances and making sure that it's not just that people, it's not just that I am innocent, but I have to appear innocent, is found in the Talmud in source number 15 as an obligation between the Jew and God. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman quotes Rabbi Yonasan. We find in Tanakh, Torah, prophets, writings, that one must satisfy others as one must satisfy God. And he quotes you several verses. I'm not going to be able to go into them in context just in the interests of time, but the first of them is a declaration you have to be innocent in the eyes of God and Israel. The second one is a declaration at the end of the book of Yoshua, at the end of the book of Joshua, when the 2.5 tribes that are going to live east of the Jordan travel back east, and they are suspected of wrongdoing. They're suspected of trying to create their own altar and a breakaway temple, and at that point they declare, by God, absolutely not. And we see there the importance of maintaining yourself above suspicion. And then finally, the verse from Proverbs, from Mishlei, to find favor and a reputation for good insight in the eyes of God and man. We need to make sure that we will not be suspected of wrongdoing. This is a religious obligation, as we saw when we talked about the apotropos, the guardian, needing to be concerned for what people are going to say when he invests the money of the orphans in his own investment. So there is this added, in Judaism, there's this added religious component. One other element that I can't resist going into, because I find it fascinating, in terms of how Judaism looks at this concern for bias and for conflict of interest. When you deal with law, or when you deal with professional obligations like the apotropos, like the guardian, we are concerned about conflict of interest. However, imagine for a moment that I was a rabbi not in 5776, 2016, but instead I was a rabbi 100 years ago. And therefore, I actually knew when I looked at a chicken whether it was kosher or treif, right? Someone brought me a chicken and had me look at the lungs and see the lesion on the lungs and determine, is this a kosher chicken or is this a non-kosher chicken, right? If you brought it to me today, oh, those are lungs? Yeah, something along those lines. I would know it was a chicken. Because I did Yoredeya. I wouldn't know which part of it was. So So imagine, though, that you go to the rabbi with it, and you ask him, is this okay, not okay? He gives you an answer. What if the rabbi is actually looking at his own shechita? Right? The rabbi himself shechted the chicken, wants to use that chicken for Shabbos, has a question about the lungs. Is the rabbi allowed to look at the lungs himself and determine whether or not this is kosher? Yeah?
Isn't it if he's known in the community to be reliable in that judgment, then he is allowed?
Yep, that's correct. Precisely correct. The rabbi is, assuming that he is of that standard for checking these things, he is allowed to look at his own chicken. Well, what happened to all the conflict of interest rules? That's a conflict of interest. I want food for Shabbos. Why in the world am I not suddenly worried about that? So the Chazon Ish, Rav Avram Yeshai Karelitz, said something which I have to say is counterintuitive, but take a look. In source number 16, in his work Emunah Ubitachon, he says, V'hine, ein hazharas hashochad michlal hamishpatim ela michlal hachukim. He says, we have different aspects of Jewish law. There is that which is called chok, and there is that which is called mishpat. Chok is a law for which we don't know the reason. That doesn't stop rabbis from suggesting reasons, but we're told you don't know why. Mishpat is where it's a logical law. We can figure this out. It's a basic statute. I would have assumed that a bribe, the prohibition against bribery, was mishpat. That's a logical rule. However, he says, no, this is actually a chok. It's a law for which you don't know the reason. Look what he says. He says it's engraved statute. For the Torah did not prohibit ruling for oneself. One may examine the kashrut of one's own slaughter. Even if he is indigent and his entire life depends on it, he has no other chicken. Doesn't make a difference. He's allowed to. Says the Chazon Ish, Rabbi Karelitz, he says, the truth of the matter is, to put it in a sentence, people are funny. And in certain ways they will be biased, and in certain ways they won't be biased, and the Torah is giving you guidelines for where you have to be concerned, where you don't have to be concerned. It's not true that you will have to be concerned across the board. I thought that was a remarkable idea. And
Is that though shofar? I mean, if you're looking for something for yourself,
yeah,
it's not really shofar. Shofar is really an agreement between two parties. John gives, Beryl gives money to John to do something, to subvert whatever profession he's in.
it's worse. It's worse than shochad, because in shochad, right? Shochad being the Hebrew word for bribery, right? In shochad, there is someone else who has an interest, and he is trying to make me see his interest as mine. In this case, it is my interest. There's no need to bring it from here to here. It's here.
But it's not shofar.
But it is. It's not shochad in the sense I wasn't.
It's
It's
a bias.
a bias. I think so. I'm.
That's exactly the point. It's not shulchan. That's why he's allowed to do it.
No, shofar means you have to pay.
I understand that you didn't violate the verse that says don't accept a bribe. However, you are bribed. You are bribed by your own interest. No one had to give you one. You gave yourself. You're right. You didn't violate a law of don't take a bribe. However, you run the risk of giving bad advice to yourself because of your personal interest in the case. That's all. I don't want to get hung up on it. I just found it to be a very interesting point and worthy of some thought. But the fundamental point that we've made now is that in both systems, there is a recognition of conflict of interest harming professional judgment, and even the appearance of conflict being unacceptable. Judaism will emphasize concern for customer service and not blinding somebody, while the CPA code adds the dimension of the status of the profession as a whole. That's basically what we've seen. Rabbi Osterker, you're in a...
Very often in rabbinic courses, the rabbi would remind the students that should they want to seek a lenient ruling, it should not be from themselves,
Yeah,
specifically.
this is true.
If you're going to rule on yourself, you should rule in a stringent way.
This is true. But he's still allowed to look at his own chicken and decide it's permitted. That's the practical, that's the Shulchan Aruch. I don't want to get hung up on this chicken. So is this a chicken one, or, sorry?
This is more, this is Torah and then quality looking after the reputation of the profession. You're looking
Okay.
at the reputation of the Jewish people as they deal with non-Jews, for example, that they should be seen as.
I mean, there's always the concern, whether you're dealing with Jews or non-Jews, for Kiddush Hashem. that you should sanctify God's name and you should not be a cause for challenge. That's part of what we said in V'yisem Nikiyim, that you have to be innocent in the eyes of God. And
when that's akin to the profession saying we want the reputation of the profession.
well, no, that's the concern for appearances exists in both, but the motivation of we don't want accounting to be brought into disrepute doesn't exist for us. We may have we don't want the reputation of observant people to be brought into disrepute, right? But you don't have the concern for the reputation of the profession. That's all I'm saying. That's all. Concern for appearances exists, but the motivation is different. Okay, so let's move into our cases now. First case, for which we've been told already that it's not a concern, but let's walk through it. The sister-in-law is in customer relations. So the CPA code is close to addressing this, but is not quite clear. Here are the concerns that one might have and the relevant elements from the CPA code. The most obvious concern is the element of the code that mentions family and personal relationships. So here, I brought you source number 17, which speaks of financial interests. What did I put? I'm just trying to figure out why I put that first.
14 and 15.
No, I know. But I'm trying to figure out if I wanted specifically to have 17 first, but I don't think so. I think I shuffled it in my notes, but didn't shuffle it on the sheet. So skip 7. Oh, no, I'm sorry. No, I'm right. Yep, we're good with 17. Stick with 17. Everything is in order. Okay. What you want here is not so much the financial interests. That's what threw me off, the heading. But 14 and 15 deal with family specifically as a threat to one's independence. A member or student shall not participate on the engagement team for an assurance client if the members or students, the bold is mine, if the members or students' immediate family member is an officer or director of the client or a related entity, or is in a position to assert significant influence over the subject matter of the engagement, or was in such a position during the period covered by the assurance report or the engagement period. So 14 says, member or student, I'm not going to go into, that's its own discussion about the student accountant, but you can't be on the engagement team. Assurance client includes auditing, includes all sorts of confirmation of information services. You can't serve on that team if you have an immediate family member who is an officer or a director or is in a position to exert significant influence over the subject matter.
I think it's those 3 words. Exert significant.
Hang on. Let me build the case. 15. A member or student shall not participate on the engagement team for an audit client, that is a reporting issuer or listed entity, if the members or students' immediate or close family member has an accounting role or a financial reporting oversight role, or at such a position during the period covered by the financial statements subject to audit by the member or firm or the engagement period. Okay, that's 14 and 15. However, and this is the point that I think Moshe was trying to get to, take a look, please, at number 18, which is the guidance, part of the guidance on that rule. It says, a person has a financial reporting oversight role when the person is in a position to or does exercise influence over the financial statements that are subject to audit or review by the member or firm, or over anyone who prepares such accounting records or financial statements. An individual holding one of the following titles will generally be considered to be in a financial reporting oversight role. Member of the board of directors, similar management or governing body, president, CEO, COO, CFO, controller, director of internal audit, director of financial reporting, treasurer, and depending upon the particular facts and circumstances, the general counsel. None of these apply to customer relations. So that part of it, the concern that your family member is somehow in charge, is less of a concern. Second possible concern, the self-interest threat. That you have something to gain by deciding a certain way on behalf of the client. Take a look, please, at source number 19, the guidance on a self-interest threat. A self-interest threat occurs when a firm or a person on the engagement team could benefit from a financial interest in or other self-interest conflict with an assurance client. Examples of circumstances that may create a self-interest threat include, but are not limited to, a direct financial interest or material indirect financial interest in an assurance client, a loan or guarantee to or from an assurance client or any of its directors or officers, dependence by a firm or office or member on total fees from an assurance client, undue concern about the possibility of losing the engagement, evaluating performance or providing compensation for selling non-audit services to an assurance client, having a close business relationship with an assurance client, and potential employment with an assurance client. So the concern might be that you have something to gain from your interest in the client. However, what tells you that this is less likely to apply here?
Customer service has nothing whatsoever.
Not just that. All of the elements here are financial.
Right, yeah.
This isn't about the role that your sister-in-law plays. If you're thinking to yourself, I want the dealership to do well, they're going to give bonuses to all of their people or something along those lines, you need to come up with a more concrete financial interest. Your personal interest, the fact that your sister-in-law is working there, is in and of itself insufficient. What about the familiarity threat that I mentioned before, that you're going to become sympathetic to them because your sister-in-law is working for the firm? Take a look at source number 20, which defines the familiarity threat. A familiarity threat occurs when, by virtue of a close relationship with an assurance client, directors, officers, employees, a firm or a person on the engagement team becomes too sympathetic to the client's interests. Examples of circumstances that may create a familiarity threat include, but are not limited to, and one of the cases is, a person on the engagement team having an immediate or close family member who is an officer or director of the assurance client. So do I have to have a concern here? No. Why not? She's not an officer. She's not a director. Correct. Good. I'm just walking us through each of the stages. The last stage goes back to financial interest. Source number 21. A member who is a partner of a firm and who holds, or whose immediate family member holds, a direct financial interest or a material indirect financial interest in an audit or review client shall not practice in the same office as the lead engagement partner for the client. Does that have anything to do with us? No. Why not? Well, there is a financial interest.
What? She works there, that's it.
That's a financial interest.
No, it's a job like any other job. It's not called financial interest.
She has a financial interest in the health of the company. I don't think you can say there's no financial interest, but she's not an immediate family member. Source number 22 defines immediate family member, a spouse or equivalent, or a dependent. She's not your dependent, I hope. I mean, I'm hopeful that this is a situation in which they're independent.
Who's your daughter rather than your sister-in-law?
Then you'd have a problem. Correct. So, and yes, there is the question of whether the outcome of the audit really will affect her. That should be mentioned as well. So based on this, it sounds like, from the CPA code's perspective, you're fine. I would suggest still following source number 23, which is the basic protocol. When a person on an engagement team knows that a close family member, note it didn't say immediate, it said close. That's different. That a close family member has a direct financial interest or a material indirect financial interest in the assurance client or related entity, a self-interest threat may exist. In evaluating the significance of any such threat, consideration should be given to the nature of the relationship between the person on the engagement team and the close family member and the materiality of the financial interest. Once the significance of the threat has been evaluated, safeguards should be applied. In other words, go through the analysis. Ask the question of, is this an issue? You don't lose by asking the question, even if the answer is going to be either this isn't a significant relationship, or it is, but it's not more significant than the financial need of the company to work with us. It may be that they say, we're not worried about it, but that's for them to say. Okay, that's all the CPA code. What is Jewish law going to say? So Jewish law does not provide, as I said before, anything resembling the detailed list of threats and relationships that we just saw in the CPA code. The self-interest threat, familiarity threat, family and personal relationships definitions, we don't have that. We also, interestingly, don't have the proactive approach that the CPA code takes. Meaning that what the CPA code is trying to do is to say, before there's a problem, before somebody has a challenge, we want you to run down this checklist in order to avoid creating a problem that will ultimately end up in court. Right? That's what they're trying to accomplish. Jewish law is much more reactive in this. It gives you rules. it says, don't put yourself in a position where you're going to have a conflict of interest. However, if something happens, then you'll go to the Beis Din, you'll go to the court, and the rabbinical court will analyze, was there a conflict of interest? Did you do right? Did you do wrong? What do we do to remedy this situation? And so forth. So you won't get a halachic list of relatives to check off in advance to know this is okay and this is not okay. However, I do want to note for you the following source number 24. Source number 24 is in a judicial context. So once again, it's not the same as when you're dealing with a profession. But I want to show you how great the sensitivity is for potential impropriety. Hechidami shochad devarim. The Gemara asks, what kind of verbal bribe could exist? Because they're discussing not only financial bribes, but also verbal bribes. So give me examples of verbal bribes. And you got 3 stories. Shmuel, the sage Shmuel, call it 3rd century Common Era, crossed a river. Someone extended his hand to him to help him across. Shmuel asked, why are you here? He replied, I have litigation. Shmuel said, I am disqualified. I can't judge for you. That's case number 1. Case number 2, Amemar, another sage, was judging when a feather landed on his head. Someone removed it. Amemar asked, why are you here? He said, I have litigation. Amemar said, I am disqualified to judge for you. You took the feather off my head. I can't judge fairly for you anymore. Mar Ukva spat before himself. He had a cold, whatever it was, and somebody came and covered it up. Mar Ukva asked, why are you here? He replied, I have litigation. Mar Ukva said, I am disqualified to judge for you. I'm not able to be dispassionate. I can't be fair between the sides. Now, whether this was their technical obligation to actually recuse themselves because of this, or whether they were going beyond the letter of the law, in this case, there are sources that discuss the fact that maybe this was actually beyond their personal obligation. But it shows you a great concern. You do have to be careful. And it's not about whether it's a sister-in-law, a first cousin, or your childhood friend with whom you went to day school. You have to assess each situation individually and ask, is there reason either for me to be biased or for somebody to think that I am biased? When I did this session with the lawyers, I gave a whole different case. It was a Facebook friend. And so that devolved into a whole discussion about whether Facebook friendship actually qualifies as friendship. But that was because there have been cases. There have been cases involving that, and the question of whether that's enough already to disqualify somebody from a case. You laugh, but it exists. There's literature on it. Okay. But that's I think in terms of dealing with question 1 about the sister-in-law, there is great room to say it's not a close enough relationship, and she's in customer relations, and therefore this is not an issue. You may want to be careful and disclose it and let others say this isn't an issue. The second one, let's say you have an issue. She's not in customer relations anymore. Now she's a controller. Right? Very financial and very affected by the results of your audit.
And
So
she didn't become controller as a result of your role as the auditor.
no. So yes, you recommended that this person is clearly very bright with numbers. So the question then becomes, are they able to consent? They can say, you know what? We're okay with it. We're happy to have you. So the CPA rules say consent works. You're fine. Take a look at source number 25. Rule 210.3, take a look. Where the agreement to provide any professional service would result in a conflict of interest under Rule 210.2, or where a previously unidentified conflict of interest under Rule 210.2 arises or is discovered in the course of providing any professional service. Wow, you used a lot of words. The member or firm must decline to provide the professional service or withdraw from providing all of the affected professional services unless, and here's B, the affected parties have knowledge of the conflict of interest and their agreement for the member or firm to accept or continue the professional services engagement as implied by their conduct in keeping with commonly accepted practice.
How do you define affected parties?
You mean you're worried about when this is going to be used by somebody else? So the concern that they have is only this client. That's why I
said really, because I'm surprised.
Yeah. They're not concerned about where these numbers are going afterwards. They're concerned with whether the client is going to be happy. I don't know if you're dealing with a publicly listed company. I'd have to go back and look and see whether that changes it.
Getting a bank loan?
It's an interesting question. But
If I was a lender, I wouldn't be impressed that somebody's brother-in-law did the audit that I'm relying on to lend $1 million.
right. I understand what you're saying. But that's the statement. It's up to them to be the ones to decide. This is an area where the Law Society is not willing to accept consent, even though the CPA Society is. I brought it for you in source number 26 from the Law Society's Rules of Professional Conduct, where it says, Rule 3.4-2 permits a client to accept the risk of material impairment of representation or loyalty. However, the lawyer would be unable to act where it is reasonable to conclude that representation or loyalty will be materially impaired, even with client consent. Possible material impairment may be waived, but actual material impairment cannot be waived. And I think the reason is because of concern for damage to the profession. What is this going to look like? So that's in terms of the secular standard. What's halacha going to say? What's Jewish law going to say in this regard? So take a look, please, at source number 27. Source number 27 from the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, is talking about judges and witnesses now. Again, we're not dealing with the professional circumstance. And it says, one who accepts a relative or disqualified party as judge or witness cannot recant if there was a kinyan, meaning they performed a formal act demonstrating agreement to this arrangement. No retraction is possible. Once you accept them, they are in. It's not lifnei iver. You're not causing someone to stumble. He's not blind. He knows full well. However, I want to suggest here, and this actually goes back to something that we've been studying in the Beit Midrash. We've been studying the laws of ona'ah, which are laws regarding overcharging people, where you don't tell the person what the correct price is. So they don't necessarily know what the right price is. I'm charging him. It's an item which he could get for $10 down the block, but I don't tell him that, and I'm selling it to him for $50. So under those laws, there's discussion about disclosure. What if the merchant says to him, you know, what I'm selling you is not really worth $10. I'm charging you $50. It's not really worth $50. It's a markup. You don't like it from me, go buy it elsewhere. And the guy says, I understand and I accept that. Does that waiver actually work? Take a look at source number 28. Also the Code of Jewish Law. If one party says to another, I am doing this on condition that you cannot claim ona'ah. You can't claim that you were cheated. This is then he can still claim ona'ah. That doesn't work. He's still able to come back to you afterwards. This is true where he did not specify, for the other does not know how much ona'ah is present in order to forgive it. In other words, when I said to him it's not really worth $50, he thought I meant it's worth $40, it's worth $45. He didn't realize it's a $10 piece of junk, right? He had no idea what I was actually selling him. So either he didn't really forgive it, or his forgiveness is not considered substantive. He's not fully informed, correct. But where he specifies, but if I told him, it's a $10 thing, and I'm selling it to you for $50, too bad. There is no claim of ona'ah. For example, when a merchant tells a customer, I'm giving you this item for $200, I know it's only worth $100, but I'm selling it to you on condition that you cannot claim ona'ah from me, you're out of luck. You bought it. It was your decision. You were fully informed. So what Jewish law is going to require is full disclosure. Now, there's some debate as to the extent of the disclosure within Jewish sources. I don't want to get distracted into that. But the point is that in terms of addressing our second question, the CPA code seems to be more forgiving than Jewish law. The CPA code says consent and doesn't really describe to what extent you have to go. Jewish law is being very demanding and saying, yes, consent can work, unlike the Law Society, which won't accept consent at all. Jewish law was willing to accept consent, but you really have to have specific disclosure of what it is that this person is consenting to. Last of our cases, we have 5 minutes to go, or 4 minutes to go. When the relationship ends, she's no longer his sister-in-law. It's now 6 minutes. It's now 1 minute. I'm getting the signal. So she was his sister-in-law 6 years ago. How much time has to elapse? So from the perspective of the CPA code, and we saw this before, just make sure they're not related now. That's the sole requirement. It was in source number 17 during the engagement period. That's it. They're no longer related. Nothing else to discuss. Presumably, though, this is always non-exclusive, meaning if you can prove that there was still a close relationship, it's not going to matter whether they're the sister-in-law now, whether they're the sister-in-law last year, whether they're the sister-in-law 10 years ago. If there's a close relationship, you're going to get into trouble. Yes. Within Jewish law, business relationships are only current, but not family. Family is considered to endure even after the business relationship comes to an end. We don't have time to go through all the sources inside. I brought it for you here in sources 29 and 30. But the principle is that witnesses who are disqualified because they are business partners are able to testify once the partnership ends. That's source number 29. However, witnesses who were related to each other are not going to be allowed to testify even when they are no longer related. It's not going to matter. Family relationships, personal disqualification is said to continue beyond the termination of the relationship. That's another distinction between what the CPA code will tell you and what Jewish law will say. So to summarize very quickly, we are concerned about diminished independence, threats to one's independence, both in the CPA code and within Jewish law. The concern is that it harms your professional judgment, that it makes you a bad person or an incompetent accountant. We are concerned also about appearances in both systems, Jewish law adding the religious component to our concern about appearances. The in-law and customer relations, the CPA code is close to prohibiting, but it stops short because she's a sister-in-law and because she's in customer relations. Jewish law will not give you clear proactive guidance on this. The second case, what about consent in lieu of conflict management? The CPA code is good with that idea. Jewish law requires full knowledge of actual bad advice that is being given. And then the third point, when the family relationship ends, how much time has to elapse? The CPA code says as long as it's not during the engagement period. Jewish law says business relationships are only current, but if it's a personal relationship, it's longer term. Please remember to recite Birkat HaMazon. For those of you who had bread, make sure to bench. There are Sidurim here. There are Sidurim outside as well. And again, thank you so much for participating. I must give way for the 1 o'clock shiur. If you could please sign in, especially if you want us to verify that you were here. If you're looking to get CPD credit for this, please make sure you sign in. If I don't have confirmation you were here, I can't confirm it to them. Thank you very much.